Aulus Clentius Habitus, the father of the defendant here, gentlemen of the jury, because of his virtue, reputation, and nobility, was easily the foremost man not only of the town of Larinum from which he came, but also of that region and neighbourhood. When he died in the consulship of Sulla and Pompey, he left the defendant, who was 15 years old, and moreover a fully grown daughter of marriageable age. Within a short time after the death of her father, she married Aulus Arrius Malinus, her cousin, a young man both exceptionally honourable and noble among his peers, as he was considered at that time. Although this marriage was full of worthiness, full of harmony, suddenly there arose a wicked passion in a shameless woman, which was combined not only with disgrace but even crime. For Sassia, the mother of Habitus here, for she will be called mother by me in this whole case, mother I say, although she is endowed with a hatred of an enemy and cruelty toward him. Section 1 continued. And so, this mother of Habitus, enthralled with love for that young man Malinus, her own son-in-law, contrary to divine law, first of all tried to restrain herself in that passion by whatever way she could, but that same restraint was not for long. Then she began to burn with madness, to such an extent that neither sense of shame, nor modesty, nor sense of duty, nor the disgrace she was causing to her family, nor the reputation of mankind, nor the resentment of her son, nor the sorrow of her daughter deterred her from her passion. She enticed the young man's feelings, which were not yet strengthened by wisdom and understanding, with all those devices by which that generation can be taken in and charmed. The daughter, since she was pained not only by that type of resentment common to women in the case of wrongs done by a husband of that kind, but also could not bear her mother's wicked immorality, which made her think that she could not even complain without feeling guilty, wanted everyone else to be unaware of such a great injustice done to her. She began to grow old with sorrow and tears in the arms of this most loving brother of hers. Section 2. But look, a sudden divorce. It seemed it would be a relief from all the evils. Cloentia left Malinus, not unwillingly, considering such great injustices, not gladly, since she was split from her husband. Then indeed that extraordinary and renowned mother began openly to gloat with happiness and to triumph with joy, the conqueror of her daughter, but not her lust. And so she was no longer willing for her reputation to be harmed by hidden suspicions. The mother-in-law married the son-in-law, with no soothsayers, no one to give her away, and with sinister omens of every kind. O unbelievable crime of the woman, and apart from this one woman, unheard of in all my life. O unbridled and untamed lust, O unparalleled daring, not to have feared, if not so much the power of the gods and the opinion of men, certainly those very walls, witnesses of your previous marriage. She shattered and laid low everything in her desire and madness. Lust conquered modesty, recklessness, fear, madness, reason. The son took the already public disgrace to the family, to the relatives, and to their name badly. Moreover, his annoyance was increased by the daily complaints and continual weeping of his sister. Section 3. You have heard what was the beginning of this man's enmity with his mother. Now indeed I will briefly set out the charges by which Oppianicus was condemned, and so that you may understand that Oppianicus was accused on such charges, with the result that neither could the accuser be afraid nor could the defendant hope, I will set forth for you a few charges of that trial. When you have ascertained these, none of you will be surprised that the defendant, not trusting his prospects, fled to Staianus for help and to bribery. Danae was a woman of Larinum, mother-in-law of Oppianicus. She had 3 sons, Marcus Arrius, Numerius Arrius, and Gnaeus Magius, and a daughter, Magia, married to Oppianicus. The very young man Marcus Arrius, captured in the Italian War in the vicinity of Asculum, fell into the hands of the senator Quintus Sergius, he who was condemned in the homicide court and was in a private prison at Sergius's house. Moreover, Numerius Arrius, his brother, was dead, and left his brother Gnaeus Magius as his heir. Later, Magia, the wife of Oppianicus, died. Finally, the one son of Danaea who was left, Gnaeus Magius, died. He made as his heir the young Oppianicus here, his sister's son, had ordered him to share the inheritance with his mother Danaea. Meanwhile, Section 3, Part 2. Meanwhile, an informer came to Danaea, clear and without doubt about what he knew, to announce to her that her son, Marcus Arrius, was alive, and was in slavery in the Gallic territory. The woman, having lost her children, since hope of recovering her only son had been proffered, called together all her relations and her son's friends, and in tears begged them to undertake the business, search out the young man, and restore to her that son whom however fortune had been willing to be the only one left out of many. When she had begun to do these things, she fell ill, and so she made a will of such a kind as to bequeath 400,000 sesterces to that son, but to make that very man over there, Oppianicus, her grandson, her heir. And within a few days she died. However, those relatives, just as they had begun to do while Danaea was alive, so when she was dead, set out into the Gallic territory with that same informer to track down Arrius. Meanwhile, Oppianicus, since he was a man of extraordinary wickedness and impudence, as you will discover from many of his actions, firstly bribed that informant with money through the agency of a certain inhabitant of the Gallic territory, a friend of his, and secondly, with no great loss having been made, he got this same Arrius removed from prison and killed. Section 4. However, those who had set out to track down and recover the relative sent out letters to Larinum, to the Auri, to the relatives of that young man and their own, which said that the business of investigating was difficult for them because they understood that the informant had been bribed by Oppianicus. Aulus Arrius, a brave and enterprising man, and of a noble house, relative of that Marcus Arrius, read out these letters in the forum, openly, in the hearing of many, when Oppianicus was present, and in a very loud voice called to witness that he would impeach the name of Oppianicus if he found out that Marcus Arrius had been killed. Meanwhile, within a short time, those who had set out for the Gallic territory returned to Larinum. They reported that Marcus Arrius had been killed. The feeling not only of the relatives but also of all the inhabitants of Larinum were aroused with hatred against Oppianicus, and pity for that young man. Therefore, when Aulus Arrius, the one who had previously given notice of his intention to prosecute, began to attack the fellow with loud threats, Oppianicus fled from Larinum and made his way to the camp of Quintus Metellius, a very distinguished man. Section 4, Part 2. Moreover, after that flight, which was testimony both of his wickedness and his guilty conscience, he never dared to trust himself to the courts, never to the laws, never to his enemies unarmed. But by taking advantage of that violent victory of Lucius Sulla, he flew with his armed men to Larinum during everyone's utmost terror. He removed from office the Council of Four, whom the townsfolk had elected. He said that he and 3 others beside had been made the Council of Four by Sulla. Moreover, he had been ordered by this same Sulla to have the following outlawed and killed: that Arrius, who had threatened him with an accusation and danger to his life; and the other Arius, and his son Gaius, and Sextus Vivius, whom he was said to have used as an agent in bribing that informer. Therefore, when these had been most cruelly killed, the rest of the townsfolk were terrified of him with great fear of being outlawed and death. When these events were revealed during his court case and trial, who is there who could think that he could be acquitted? Section 5. However, these are trivial matters. Learn the rest, so that you may be amazed, not that Oppianicus was finally condemned, but that he had been unpunished for any length of time. First of all, see the impudence of the fellow. He was very keen to marry Sassia, the mother of Habitus, her whose husband, Aurus Aulius, he killed. Whether he who was asking was more insolent, or she, if she married him, was more cruel, it is difficult to say. But still, learn about the refinement and steadfastness of both of them. Oppianicus asked Sassia to marry him, and strove for this most earnestly. She, however, did not wonder at his boldness, nor spurn his shamelessness, nor finally did she dread that house of Oppianicus which was overflowing with the blood of her husband. But she replied that because Oppianicus had 3 sons, it was for that reason she shrank from this marriage. Oppianicus, since he had longed for Sassia's money, thought that he must seek a remedy to this delay, which was being brought to his marriage from his own house. For though he had an infant son by Novia, and his other son, born of Papia, was being brought up at his mother's house at Taenum in Apulia, which is 18 miles distant from Larina, without any reason he suddenly summoned the boy from Taenum. Previously it was not his custom to do this, except at games or holidays. The poor mother, suspecting no evil, sent him. When Oppianicus pretended that he was setting out for Tarentum, on that very day, the boy, although he had been seen in public at the 11th hour quite well, he died before nightfall, and the next day was cremated before it could get light. Section 5, continuation. And so the people's gossip announced this exceedingly great sorrow to the mother before anyone from the family of Oppianicus. When she heard simultaneously that not only had her son been snatched away from her, but also participation in his funeral rites, she came breathless to Larinum immediately, and there held the funeral fresh for her son, who was already buried. 10 days had not yet passed when the other infant son was killed. And so Sassia married Oppianicus forthwith, with a heart now joyful and strengthened by excellent hope. And no wonder, because she saw herself assuaged not by marriage gifts, but by the death of his sons. Thus, whereas most people are accustomed to being more desirous of money for the sake of their children, that man thought that losing children was more pleasant on account of money. Section 6. Gentlemen of the jury, considering your decency, I feel that you were deeply disturbed when these great crimes were briefly pointed out by me. Therefore, in what state of mind, indeed, do you think those who not only had to hear about these things, but even judge them? You are hearing about that man on whom you are not sitting in judgment, about that man who you do not see, about that man whom you cannot hate now, about that man who has satisfied both nature and the laws, whom the laws have punished with exile and nature with death. You are listening to this not from an enemy. You are listening without witnesses. You are listening when those things which can be described in the fullest terms are being described by me and cursorily. They were hearing about that man, about whom they had to cast their votes on oath, about that man whose abominable and guilty expression they were looking upon face to face, about that man whom they hated because of his insolence, about that man whom they considered worthy of every kind of punishments. They heard from the accusers, they heard the words of many witnesses, they heard when Canutius, a very eloquent man, spoke about each and every event, weightily and at length. And is there anyone, since he knew the facts, Who could imagine that Oppianicus was innocently crushed and cheated by the court? Section 7. Gentlemen of the jury, I will now mention the rest briefly to reach those events which are nearer to and more connected with this man's case. May you, I pray, hold in your memory that this is not my intention to accuse Oppianicus when he is dead, but since I want to persuade you of this, that the court was not bribed by this man, Cluentius, and to use this as the beginning and foundation of my defence, that Oppianicus, a most wicked and most guilty man, was condemned. When he himself gave the goblet to his wife Cluentia, who was the aunt of Habitus here, she suddenly shouted out in the midst of the drink that she was dying from the utmost pain, and she lived no longer than she spoke, for in this very conversation and clamour she died. In addition to this death, which was so sudden, and the cry of the dying woman, all things besides which are usually signs and proofs of poison were found in the body of that dead woman. With this same method of poison he killed his brother, Gaius Oppianicus. Nor is this enough, though in the murder of his brother by itself no crime seems to have been admitted. However, in order to embark upon this abominable crime, he paved the way to it beforehand by other crimes. For although Aurea, his brother's wife, was pregnant, and since the birth now seemed to be approaching, he killed the woman with poison. Afterwards he attacked the brother, when he had already drained that cup of death and was shouting about his own death and that of his wife, and wanted to change his will. In the very indication of this wish, he died, too late. Little plot skip to section 10. Consider the following. Oppianicus, did not your father clearly kill your aunt, Danaea, whose heir you are? When he had introduced her to that doctor of his, who was already well known and often victorious, the woman cried out that there was no way she wanted to be cared for by him, under whose care she had lost all her family. Then suddenly he, Oppianicus the elder, approached a certain inhabitant of Ancona, Lucius Clodius, a travelling medicine seller, because he happened to be in Larinum at that time, and he does a deal with him for 2,000 sesterces, a fact that was proved at that time by his own tablets. Since Lucius Clodius was in a hurry and had many markets left to visit, he completed the matter as soon as he was brought in. He finished off the woman with the first drink, and afterwards did not delay in Larinum for a moment of time. While this same Danaea was making her will, Oppianicus, since he had been her son-in-law, seized the wax tablets and removed the bequests with his finger. Moreover, when he had done this in many places after her death, so that he could not be condemned by the erasures, he transcribed the will onto other tablets and sealed them with counterfeit seals. I pass over many things deliberately. Indeed, I'm afraid that these facts might seem to be too numerous. However, you should consider him true to himself in the other sections of his life. He it was whom the town council unanimously judged to have falsified the official register of the censors at Larinum. Section 11. No one transacted financial matters with him any longer. No one transacted any business. Out of so many close and distant relations, no one ever enrolled him in his will as guardian for his children. No one judged him worthy of an approach, or a meeting, or a conversation, or a banquet. Everyone spurned him, everyone shrank from him, everyone as if they were fleeing some monstrous and destructive beast and plague. However, Habitus would never have accused this fellow, who was so insolent, so wicked, so guilty, gentlemen of the jury, if he had been able to pass over it while preserving his life. Oppianicus was the defendant's personal enemy. He was. And yet he was his stepfather. His mother was cruel and hostile towards him, and yet she was his mother. Finally, nothing was so removed from an accusation than Cloentius, both by nature, inclination, and established way of life. But since this was the situation for Cloentius, that he should either accuse him as justice and duty demanded, or die violently and unworthily, he preferred to accuse him, by whatever means he could, rather than die in that fashion. This is the end of year 1, Cicero.